Let's start with a look at what is called Black January. Black January refers to a night of terror unleashed on the people of Baku, Azerbaijan on the night of January 19th and 20th, 1990. 100 years ago, in 1922, the Union of Socialist Soviet Republics, the USSR, was stitched together from the old Russian Empire. Among nations incorporated by force into the USSR were the Caucasus nations of Armenia, Georgia, and Azerbaijan. In 1922, the USSR began a 70 years of terror that killed millions of people. It also created millions of opponents, even among its own citizens. 1953, anti-Soviet riots were suppressed in East Berlin. Soviet tanks rolled into Hungary in 1956. A Soviet wall was built in Berlin to keep people from escaping Soviet terror and Soviet paradise. More Soviet tanks rolled into the freedom-seeking Czechoslovakia in 1968. In the late 1980s, Soviet-supported Armenian irregulars launched an ethnic cleansing of Armenia's 250,000 Azerbaijani residents in 1987. 250,000 Azerbaijanis subjected to large-scale pogroms were expelled from Armenia. As this happened before the Balkan Wars of the 1990s, Europe had not seen anything like this ethnic cleansing since World War II. Armenian mobs attacked Azerbaijanis wherever they lived in Armenia, and they had lived in Armenia for centuries. This ethnic cleansing of Azerbaijanis from Armenia, as well as Armenia's territorial claims against Azerbaijan, brought about large-scale anti-Soviet protests in the Azerbaijani capital of Baku. The sense was that the Soviet authorities in Moscow were supporting Armenia over Azerbaijan. Thus, Azerbaijanis hit the streets of Baku demonstrating with such vigor and massive numbers that Soviet masters in Moscow were helpless to squelch or hide demonstrations that morphed into a national freedom movement. Hundreds of thousands of Azerbaijani demonstrators were on the streets when America's Newsweek magazine ran a photo of those hundreds of thousands on its cover in December 1989. Its title, "Standing Up for Freedom, People of the Year." The massive demonstrations in Baku, the traditional oil-producing center that supplied every drop of oil the USSR needed to fight Germany in World War II, frightened Moscow and its communist leader, Mikhail Gorbachev. Yes, that Gorbachev. The leader, President Ronald Reagan, demanded that he, quote, "tear down this wall." Moscow's Soviet leaders decided that Azerbaijani demonstrators and their movement must be stopped. During the night of January 19 and 20, 1990, Gorbachev ordered 26,000 Soviet troops and their tanks to flood Baku streets to end the continuous and massive demonstrations of the growing freedom movement. The attack on Baku came from 5 directions. The orders: clear the streets. Hundreds of men and women were crushed or injured by tanks that made no effort to spare the lives of people on the streets. People crushing Soviet tanks were supposed to terrorize any nation that dared challenge 70 years of Soviet tyranny. So thought Gorbachev and his cronies. A report entitled Black January in Azerbaijan was issued by the Human Rights Watch. It stated, quote, "Indeed, the violence used by the Soviet army on the night of January 19 and 20 was so out of proportion to the resistance offered by Azerbaijanis as to constitute an exercise in collective punishment. The punishment inflicted on Baku by Soviet soldiers may have been intended as a warning to nationalists, not only in Azerbaijan, but in the other republics of the Soviet Union," unquote. Tanks and heavy armored vehicles were driven over people. Ambulances and passenger buses were fired upon. City streets were littered with destroyed vehicles and bodies of people. During the night attack, 130 civilians were killed in Baku. The Soviet army continued its violence in other cities such as Neftchala and Lankaran in the southern parts of the country. A total of 147 Azerbaijani civilians were killed in the 20 January massacre. Injured, 744 people. 400 people were detained, arrested by the Soviet troops. In the aftermath of the massacre, Soviet administrators declared a state of emergency. Baku was completely controlled by the Soviet army. A strict and threatening Soviet curfew was enacted, promising a stronger response if violated. Gorbachev hoped that the brutality of Black January would make Azerbaijan give up its fight for freedom. But his crime led to one of the most powerful human demonstrations in modern history. Over 1 million Azerbaijanis took to Baku streets, showing the world that a desire for freedom and massive honor for those killed by Soviet troops and tanks on the night of January 19th was far more important than Moscow's threats. The victims were buried in Highland Park, near the National Parliament building. The funerals were held in the Lenin Square, which soon would be called the Freedom Square, from where they, the dead, were taken on the people's shoulders to the cemetery, now called the Martyrs' Lane. An estimated 1 million people accompanied the funerals. Muslim, Jewish, and Christian faith leaders held public prayers together as a message of shared faith, hope, and values. Other than the Newsweek cover photo and story of the freedom movement in December 1989, Americans had little information about the Soviet brutality of January 1990. U.S. and European media were also not interested in highlighting the bloodshed. The Western governments and mainstream media were more interested in maintaining the polished image of Gorbachev as an alleged Soviet reformer. So no bloodshed committed by him was to be allowed to get in the way of this image. No wonder. 10 months after Gorbachev killed and injured hundreds of innocent civilians, he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. In general, Americans were aware of post-World War II Soviet brutality, but had little knowledge of the millions of people in the Ukraine that were deliberately starved to death in the 1930s. Little was known of what Soviet troops did to Berlin when they took it in April 1945. Much of that lack of knowledge ended in June 1950, when Soviet-controlled North Korea invaded South Korea and caused 34,000 Americans to die in 3 years of fighting Soviet-controlled forces of North Korea and China. As mentioned, riots in East Germany, tanks crushing Hungarians and Czechs, were noticed by Americans, even while Soviet suppression in the Caucasus region was not. January 20th, 1990 in Baku and other towns and cities of Azerbaijan sparked a freedom movement that swept the Soviet Union aside. In a short couple of years, Black January did what East Germans, Hungarians, and Czechs couldn't do. It helped the Soviet Union to die. Historians call Black January the beginning, quote, of the end of the Soviet Union, unquote. It marked the first time that the Soviet army was used to suppress the citizens of the Soviet Union within the Soviet Union. It killed the very last glimpse of hope of the Azerbaijani people and millions of other Soviet citizens in the possibility of remaining part of the USSR. Now, the only way that remained was the restoration of independence for Azerbaijan and all other 14 republics. Thus, the Soviet Union began to fall. Let me state how I felt the day the Soviet flag came down. I think I know how those million demonstrators felt at the same moment. I was ecstatic. I teared up. Millions of people were ecstatic, and they too teared up. The rage of Black January became the joy of independence and freedom. A year and a half after the massacre, on October 18, 1991, Azerbaijan restored its independence. January 20 is a date that shall live in the hearts of millions forever.